Geez, I'm excited. I'm excited to be here tonight, and also excited to be with both Aaron and Caitlin, who I've presented with many times. And I'm excited, obviously, to learn more about Horizons Quest as well. And it's great to be here. Caitlin, let's go to you next.
Hi there. How are y'all? Thank you so much for having us this evening. My name's Caitlin Provost. I am the Regional Director of Admission for Texas Christian University. I'm actually based full time up in Massachusetts in New England. And I just completed my 20th full year in college admission. So I've been around for a little while as well. I'm excited to speak with you all tonight and hopefully share some great information. But I'm also really excited to learn more from you all about this fantastic sounding program. So thanks again, Erin.
Thanks. My name's Erin Bernard. I'm the director of first year admissions at UMass Amherst. I've been in the game for 15-ish years, mainly at UMass Amherst. That's been a wide or a vast majority of my experience, but did work in another smaller college in Massachusetts as well.
Okay, thank you so much. Um, so I got some questions from the audience, like pre-submitted, but I really want to start off like what happens when you receive application. So basically, I know like when we hit submit, then some logistic things happens, and then you all come together in a room. So can you like walk us through like what happens when you start the process? Means either one of you can take, or each you can go in the same order. Maybe that makes it easy.
All right, maybe I'll talk about the first part of getting all the materials together, and maybe Caitlin, you can talk about reading, and maybe Aaron, you can talk about decisions. Um, it's one of the most impossible things for kids and sometimes even parents to believe that the application materials that would include the student's application and the supporting documents that come from the school transcript and school profile and recommendations, that all of these materials find their way into our office and then find their way to the student's account, and it does so successfully. Um, well, some of us are old enough to have done this in the paper days when all of this information came through the mail, and we still it all made its way to the same manila folder. And now it does so electronically, it does so seamlessly and relatively effortlessly. I think one of the myths is that, when a student submits their application, at most schools, that doesn't mean the application's complete. Usually there are other supporting documents that need to come from the school, mainly the transcript and sometimes at some schools recommendations. Once whatever supporting documents arrive, and are logged into the system, then that application would be deemed complete by that school, and it could then usually enter the sort of the reading process and the reading kind of flow chart that exists at that school. Some schools read as applications come in. Other schools will wait and read once they've got a larger cohort of applicants. Some schools might use rolling admission where applications are read and decisioned and notified right away. But more common is where students apply and then are later notified of their decision at a later deadline. So the application really could be read at any point, which does lead me to kind of reading applications. Maybe Caitlin, you can take that.
Yeah, absolutely. I first want to preface that when you ask college admission counselors the vast majority of questions that you're going to ask them, their answer might be it depends, because we all work our processes just a little bit different. So our review and committee process may look different than, UMass and Holy Cross, but I can kind of talk to you about the generals that we do at TCU. Once that application and all those materials process into our system and we have a completed application, we have a wonderful process called first reading that takes care of all the math and the logistics early for us. So we have a set of first readers that go in and kind of, tally up grades and GPA and count up classes and any sort of, advanced AP, honors, IB classes, dual credit, things like that, and kind of get that all into the system for us. Then it is going to go to the series of admission counts. counselors. At TCU, we specifically read by geographic region. So, for example, I told you all that I'm based full time in Massachusetts. I personally read every single application that comes to TCU from any student applying from the New England states. Some colleges run things a little bit differently and they read by, different academic program or things like that. So, there might be somebody who reads specifically for engineering or specifically for biology. We do geographic region. This is, I think, the biggest part of the application read because these are the counselors who know your areas really well, who know your high schools or know your academic programs. And so they're really taking the time to go in, and most schools perform what we call a holistic review. Basically, what that means is that we're looking at everything. I would say the biggest part of the review is going to be a deep dive into those transcripts, taking a look at grades, grade trends, course selection. Have you challenged yourself appropriately in terms of what you're thinking about studying? We're looking at school profiles and learning what your school is all about and all the course offerings. So that's going to be a big part. And then after that is kind of the fun part to me because that's when we get to know you as a person and not just a transcript. So we get to go in and look at your essay. To me, I'll be honest, there's not one essay topic that's better than another, as long as I'm learning something about you and I feel you genuinely jumping off the page. Letters of recommendation are fantastic because we get an outside view as to kind of who you are as a person, what people have to say about you, what kind of effort you put into the classroom, what kind of community member you might come be on our campuses. That's really fun. And then the activities list is fantastic. You all work so hard both inside and outside of the classroom. So this is your time to get to brag on yourself a little bit. Tell us what you've been up to. We're fascinated. We really want to know. And a program like this sounds like it could be something very, very impressive for said resume. After that, it kind of goes through, at least at my school, a lot of different kind of what we call committee processes, which is when the final decisions are made. So I'll hand that over to Erin, and maybe you want to talk about decisions and maybe a bit about committee.
Yeah. We don't have committee, so I don't know a whole lot about committee, but I know the general idea of it. So when colleges go to make decisions, a lot of it is really based on the school's needs and mission or what they're looking for in a class. Everybody's trying to create a community. And so when they're making decisions, they want to find community members. And they want a range of type of person, of background, of major, of everything. And so they're kind of crafting a class when they make their decisions based on kind of the school and what they're looking for. We also, a lot of schools, not all schools, but will make decisions. So there's lots of different decisions you can receive, but admit, that's a pretty obvious one, and deny. I think those are two that people are very familiar with. You can get waitlisted, which can mean kind of different things at different schools, but for the most part, the kind of I think more traditional waitlist is that they admit the amount of students they think they need in order to get their class. And then they wait and see who deposits. And after May 1st, which is the national candidate reply date, they kind of assess, did we make our class? Did we get the numbers that we needed? And if not, then they can pull from the wait list. Now we have lots of people behind the scenes who work the statistics and trends and try to see if we're on track with our deposits based on what's happening in the world possibly at that moment. And if we need to take people off the wait list early, that could happen. People will do that. Another decision you could receive is called a defer. You get deferred. And so schools sometimes that have early admissions, they will defer you to their regular round. So this is basically kicking the application down the line so that they can review it with the regular pool. And so they see potential. Maybe they want to see some senior year grades. Maybe they just want to take a look at the regular pool with some students who are deferred to make those decisions. And so you could receive a decision like that as well. And receiving the decisions piece of it, I think, is definitely probably the hardest piece as a prospective student. because it's not in your control and it's not personal. And that's something that I talk with students about all the time, is like it feels very personal because you have done this self-reflection and you've put yourself on this piece of paper and if poured your heart and soul onto it and you send it off to a stranger and then you like await your fate. Um, and schools are businesses and they make decisions that sometimes might not make sense to you, but it's not personal. And then the best part is when you get your decisions, you gain all the power back. And then schools are like, pick me, pick me. And you get to kind of decide where you want to go, and really have that kind of like power and control back. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, this was a good start. So tagging off from here, so which means like no means I don't know if that happens in all colleges, but like sometimes people think that, oh, when the application comes, like if you have say 3.75 GPA, if you are below that, your applications goes in a different pile and is never read. So do you think it's like a kind of a myth which is like wrong myth in general, like, or like there could be some colleges where they really have a hard cutoff and never even read the application if the GPA or SAT, like any number is below a threshold, for example.
I don't think any of us could speak for every admission office out there in the world. We though generally have lots of friends who work at lots of schools and even schools that receive six figures in applications every year. I've never heard of a process like that. Certainly, actually, I've heard of that process, but it's only generally from students and parents, not from other admissions officers. And I've certainly been on panels and talked to friends who work at schools that receive over 100,000 applications, and they would attest that they read every application. Um, I'm going to acknowledge, though, that some applications take more time than others. And sometimes it's the incredibly strong applicant that doesn't take a lot of time when reading. Um, and sometimes it's the incredibly weak applicant that doesn't take a lot of time in reading, but sometimes it's that applicant that's more nuanced and in the middle, or maybe it's just an application that is from a perspective or a school or a curriculum that I may not be as familiar with, that I have to spend more time. So time spent does not necessarily ever denote where the applicant would fit within the pool, but I'd say pretty much everybody's going to get a look.
Okay.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with Drew. I think that the vast majority of the schools out there now are performing what I mentioned earlier in terms of a holistic review, a formulaic review with like you got to meet this, this, and this. It's just so rare at this point in time. So I wouldn't let that be something that continues to be a myth out there for anybody that's listening. At the end of the day, you applied to our school and you gave us that respect. So in return, we are going to do the same for you as an applicant. And to Drew's point, sort of that, middle range, I think is the part that takes the most time, because even though a student's GPA might be just under for, our college or a certain program or major, maybe they have something going on in their personal life that affected their, academic situation that was outside of their control, or maybe they have an experience as a human that is just so outstanding. We can really kind of look past maybe slightly lower academics, but those other things are such a standout that we think they deserve a chance on our campus. So it is a nuanced review there.
The only thing I'll add is that, so in the state of Massachusetts, we have different kind of cohorts of schools. So like there's 4 UMasses, then there's the state schools, and then there's the community colleges. And the state schools they follow a sliding scale that's basically like minimums from the state. They're given by the state, and they use that sliding scale in a lot of their acceptances and denials. But even then, they still sometimes take people who are below state minimum, because we can take a certain percentage that are. So in order to find those people, they're reading everybody's application. So even in a space where that's how they do their admissions, they're still reading pretty much everybody who's coming in.
Okay, thank you. And So this just means that sometimes there is a pressure, and I think as parents we are to be blamed. Like you can never get a B, right? Means this is what we tell kids. And I guess that is really a big means now I have understood that's a really big myth. Like you got a B in ninth grade and that ruined your college chances. So I would think that would be a like plain like that's not true kind of thing, right? Because like 4.0 GPA, I'm like, how do kids get like all kids get just 4.0 GPA? I don't even know. But many kids do get 4.0.
Here's the way that I look at it, and I'm sorry, Drew, to jump in. But if a college is not going to accept you because you got a B, is that the college that you want to go to? Is that the college that's going to be open to learning about you as a person and letting you explore? For me, that would be a no. So I'm just putting that out there that remember it's about, fit in all ways around. And you want to choose a college where you feel free to be yourself. So if you're an outstanding applicant who maybe has less than a 4.0, there are going to be so many colleges out there that are going to beg you to come to their campuses and change people's lives. And if it's the one school that doesn't like that you didn't get an A in something, who cares? Let him be. And that's just my opinion.
That's so well said.
Yeah, I would also say that so much of the time when you're seeing advice or you're talking about college, like we're though the pieces of advice that are being given are like the extreme. It's like for those colleges that accept single digit percentages of people, and that's such a small portion of the colleges that are out there. So like sometimes, you know, people will say like, do I take all AP classes my senior year? And like I'm like, if you took no AP classes your senior year and got all A's, that would look great for us at UMass Amherst and lots of other schools. You know, I want you to challenge yourself, but like if we're getting down to the nitty-gritty, like if you if you get a good GPA and you didn't take APs, like there's going to be schools that are going to accept you. And so I think, and similar to like a student who maybe did try to challenge themselves and they got B's and C's, there's schools for those kids too. Like there's plenty of schools out there. And so I think that and good schools, I think that sometimes we're so focused on like the top 10 to 15 schools and how to get in there. And those admissions, maybe you have a student who wants to get into those places, like they're not taking one letter grade and kicking you out. Like they're looking at all students who are stellar students, and whether you have zero point 0.2 GPA off from that, like they know you're a stellar student and they're really looking at the other stuff a lot of times. They have too many students who are do very well academically, and just because you got one B is not going to kick you out of the pool. They're already kind of moved on to the other things in your application.
Okay, yeah, that's good. So there was a question which was submitted earlier that in today's so is SAT really critical to get admission in a good college? How important SAT score is in today's time? So these were two separate questions, and I would say like yeah, probably this question is more for like test optional colleges, right? Like if it's test required, then I'm sure it will be a big criteria, like deciding factor. So if you guys can speak to that.
There's certainly been a lot in the media over the last 9 months about certain schools returning to requiring standardized testing since the pandemic, and that's created a lot of conversation, a lot of fervor amongst parents, and a lot of money for the test prep agencies who are elated at this movement. Um, What we're not seeing, though, is the article about the thousands of colleges and universities who have remained test optional. That's just worth noting. I think people think this big tidal wave of schools returning to testing is happening, and it's more like a little kiddie wave. I would say, I think the last time I saw the figure, it was in the 80%, like well over 80% of colleges and universities are test optional these days. Um, I work at a test optional school, and I think I'm proud to do so, but I also recognize that giving the choice for students creates a second wave of anxiety. They feel the anxiety taking the test, and then they feel the anxiety about the decision of whether or not to submit their scores or not. And part of the reason we went to test optional was to reduce anxiety, and instead we've doubled it. And part of that, I think, is because there's this myth that or fear that if you don't submit scores to a test optional school, that the school will think you did poorly, or that will really hurt your chances. And the truth is, I think at most test optional schools, if you don't submit scores, they literally don't think about your scores. It's just that simple. Um, those schools have recognized that they can do an evaluation on your application against the overall applicant pool without that one piece of information. Some schools give really good guidance about if your score is blank, then you should submit, and if your score is not, then you shouldn't. I would say school counselors can usually be a very good source of information there as well. Um, and obviously, there are some schools, even in Massachusetts, who are still technically test optional, but still have a preference for testing. And that's a good conversation to have with your school counselor, because they would have the best insight about kind of the very, very small number of schools who have held on to test optional, but are probably 1 foot on their way to return to required testing. So overall, I'd say it's never been easier to apply to college or university without testing than it has since the pandemic started. Testing has never played a smaller role, and it certainly can in a student's application, but there should be less stress about standardized testing than there ever has been.
I'll just add to that a little bit. Drew, to your point, I feel like it's the anxiety around now, like, do I submit, do I not submit? For those schools that are still in the test optional space. And I will also echo that I promise, if you choose not to submit testing, I am not spending a second thinking about why you did or did not submit testing. And there are some schools out there like mine that understood this anxiety. And so along with our test optional policy, we are also do no harm at TCU, meaning if you submit your tests, we will only use them if they benefit your application. If they don't, it will not impact you whatsoever. So we will just remove them from consideration if they're actually not helpful to the overall academic picture. I will also say too that previous to the pandemic, we did require testing at TCU. And even then, with required testing, if we came across an applicant so dynamic in other ways, but they had low test scores, we could still take that student. So while testing may be more important at some schools than others, for the most part, it's truly not the end all be all of that situation.
Okay, thank you. So we have a question in chat, and I think this is from a student. So, oh, we have many questions. I'm sorry. Is a C or a B in AP college, AP/college class better than an A in a lower level class? So I think this is a very commonly asked question, and we get like mixed feedback from whom you ask, I guess. So.
Yeah, and I think probably because it depends on the school. For me, the answer is pretty simple if you look at it from a point of view of how we recalculate the GPA, and all of the Massachusetts state schools have to recalculate the GPA in the same way, and we give a full letter grade of weight for AP and college level classes. So in the recalculation of the GPA, a B in an AP class is the exact same as an A in a college prep class, but you get the added, you challenged yourself, which I think in the holistic read looks a little bit better. I would say if you're getting C's in AP class, what that's telling me is like maybe you should be taking honors and seeing how you're doing in honors classes, or, it's tough to see a student getting C's or D's in AP classes and still see them taking them year after year because they're not being successful. We want to see you challenge yourself, but be successful. And so getting that feedback that you're not being successful and ignoring it and still taking them, I don't think is that great.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So basically, trying it is good, but like once you reevaluation, reflection is super important, right? So follow up is important. Okay. So next question is, does clearing KLEP exam, I don't know what this is, but maybe you guys know, help getting into top schools?
For us, for CLEP exams, that's nothing we ever see from at least the way TCU does it from our end. We don't see any of those exam scores, nothing. The only time that that comes into play is after the admission process is complete for students who have done any of that work, that can possibly go towards some credit hours or moving up levels in current college classes that they would be taking. So for the admission piece, not for us.
I would just say, and I would maybe even expand it to like AP exams and lots of other additional ways that you can spend money on testing. um, it's, especially, if you're in the second half of your high school career, especially if those exams are going to cost money, it's best to check in, at least on the websites, if not reaching out to the schools that you think you might apply to decide like how are these scores used in the process. More often, especially recently, Caitlin's answer is the general one, which it's not generally used in the admissions process, but it could be used as far as placement or sometimes advanced standing, but sometimes not. So if there's a rush to spend money or spend a lot of time on some of these exams, you certainly, if the only goal is for an advantage in the admissions process, you might want to check in with some specific schools to find out the answers.
Okay, yeah, great advice. So there's a question about athletics. So how do you build profile for student athletes who are interested in scientific research or medicine or engineering? Uh, so anyone who want to take this?
So the question was about athletics, but also about scientific research.
Yeah,
I
they're
missed.
saying like, how do you build profile for student athletes? So I think in high school, they're maybe like good in athletics
Yeah.
and
Okay. So maybe I can talk. Maybe this is a good time to talk generally about like engagement outside of the classroom and activities and how that's evaluated. Um, first, I would say um, we are impressed by what students do. Um, I think perhaps a misunderstanding amongst the general applicant public is that we make decisions or we make value judgments on some activities or accomplishments versus others. Generally speaking, we are impressed that students do. What exactly they're doing um, is less of a deal for us. The most important part, at least in my experience of reading applications, is how students are able to articulate the things that they've done, the person they've become because of those things, and the lessons they've learned and the values that they've gained from these activities. And that goes from, sometimes I'll say like, we don't think being president of student government is better than a job at CVS. We think both are great. What matters more is how does the student articulate that in their essay, in a supplemental essay, in an interview? How does the guidance counselor reflect upon that experience? I don't, from some of the students I've interviewed, nothing sounds harder to me than babysitting multiple younger siblings. That to me sounds like the most impressive extracurricular activity. And sometimes I think students feel like the admissions world is only impressed by official summer scientific research projects. And those can be great. But you know what else is great is babysitting younger cousins and younger siblings. More important is how you articulate those experiences. The most impressive scientific discovery during a summer research project will totally fall flat in the application process if it's not articulated well and if there's not some reflection from the student upon that experience. So that's really the most important part of how it plays out in the application process. that generally it is really easy for us to be impressed by students and their accomplishments in their free time, but we are most easily impressed by reflection and some discernment process about that experience and how it shaped them.
Okay. Yeah. So this is universal, right? So I think there was one question again, and I feel that's kind of answered. Like, does extracurricular matters more than grades? I would say there's nothing more or less, right? It's okay. Yeah, Drew.
So just to clarify, I would say like there's at least in our review process and most that I'm familiar with, there's less that academics is the cake
Okay.
and the rest of the application, extracurriculars, essay tends to be in the frosting. Um, we make less of a differentiation between one particular activity versus another activity, but the conversation amongst admissions readers and admissions committees about an applicant, it generally starts with academics. And if that cake is good enough, then you kind of go on to the frosting. But no one no one really wants frosting without cake.
Yeah, I would say that, the academics, I always tell people like at UMass Amherst, when I'm talking to students just specifically about our school, I always say like the students up here, and I'm kidding, but also kind of serious, pending any criminal activity, like they're getting in. And then there's like students that are kind of way below the GPA, and it's like they're not getting in kind of no matter what. And it's based off the fact that they have shown that I don't think they'll be successful here. And that's a big financial commitment to have a student here that could fail out and then still owe money. And so we don't want a student to come and not be successful. And sometimes we take risks on students, but those students show us some kind of inkling that we think they'll be successful here academically. A lot of schools have more academically qualified students than they have spots. And so they have to look at the other things in the application to choose community members. And that's providing a lot of context. So like, I always tell students that context is a really big part of our review. And so it's not like that's why we don't say like you have to have a 3.0 GPA or we're not reading you, because if someone with different opportunities who has a 3.2, we might not think is as great as someone who had a lot less opportunities and has a 2.9. And so we're kind of viewing everything within what opportunities were available to you, what did you take advantage of, and how successful were you? And so that's where the non-academic stuff really comes into play. And I think the more that we do this, like the more people fall within that middle range of where we really are trying to use, they are academically qualified and we just don't have enough spots, so we have to kind of look elsewhere. Yeah.
Okay. So I think a student asked, like, if you only find out what you want to do in your senior year and you haven't taken classes pertaining to that, how would you improve your chances of getting into university of your choice?
No, that's a great question. And I'm sure we all have different opinions about this, but there are going to be a lot of students who don't figure out what they want to do until their senior year of high school. And there are going to be a lot of students who don't figure out what they want to do until their senior year of college. I'm 43 and I'm still kind of figuring it out. It's one of those things that we understand that 16, 17, 18-year-old students may not necessarily know what they want to do for the rest of their lives, and that's completely okay. And even if you think you might know what you want to do for the rest of your life, your mind may change, and that's also okay. So if we're talking about this specific example of, you're going into your senior year of high school, your courses are already selected, but all of a sudden you realize that you had a real interest in chemistry because of, I don't know, maybe this summer STEM internship that you did or something like that. Letting colleges know, I think, is perfectly appropriate. There are generally spaces in schools' applications or the common application to submit additional information. So just kind of explaining, hey, I didn't think this was going to be my path, but actually I have a really strong interest in this, and just letting people know. I think that's the biggest part of things. You may or may not be able to alter your senior year coursework to reflect that a little bit. Some schools may care about that, some schools may not. A lot of colleges and universities out there as well, when you apply to them, you actually don't apply into a specific academic program. A lot of schools, you just apply into the school and you declare a major later on. So that's something else to look into. So honestly, it is not the end all be all that, again, you don't know what you want to do right from your first year of high school. Students switch and change and things like that all the time, and that's completely okay. I also, for what it's worth, love a good undecided major. You do not have to pick a major going in if you do not want to. There are so many chances to learn and explore different passions. So please know that most schools will have a pathway for you to do that.
Um, okay. So I want to also just touch a little bit on the STEM, like this research thing before we run out of time. Like I'm seeing a lot of people, like say our program also, when they're joining, the first question they ask is like, can I get a publication? Or if you talk to a private counselor, they're like, oh, you're doing STEM research. How about, but you don't have a publication, so the impact is not there. And being a scientist, it's like a publication is not an impact because those publications are impactless. They don't have an impact factor, like no pun intended. So, but how are colleges seeing it? Because I think there is a rise in number of publications with AI being there and everything, right? So much help. Like, so how are you guys navigating, or what are the suggestions from you?
Yeah. Look, if you publish something, that's great. But I think where we need to kind of like stop and think is who is has the ability to publish things and who does not have access to the ability to publish things. So as college admissions counselors, we're not holding it against somebody if they're not doing something. We're really just looking at the things you're doing and, as Drew said, and getting impressed by them. Mainly because students these days do so much, and a lot of us are like, I didn't do that. Um, but I think that the stuff that people think is really impressive, I think the thing they miss is that, most students don't have the ability or access to do those things. So we're not going to hold it necessarily high above somebody else. The fact that you're really interested in something like research, like science, and you're showing us that you have this passion about it, and you're maybe, taking it into your own hands, and you're a little bit more independent, and you're finding these programs or things that are giving you experience in that field is wonderful. That doesn't mean that someone who published something that I'm gonna look at it and be like, well, like not everybody can do that. So like I'm still very impressed by it. But I think I'm not like blocking off somebody's access to my school just because they don't have that.
And there is a rising industry of pay for experiences that is growing in the science world. So people are capitalizing on families' anxiety about college admissions and looking to make money. Um, and so, yeah, a buyer beware on some of these experiences. If someone's telling you you have to pay money to do this thing to get into college, um, uh, I would look to hear a college who says that first before somebody who wants to take your money, who's telling you that.
I'll jump in here as well. And the reason why is because we offer an optional part of our application process called the Freedom of Expression page at TCU, and students can choose to submit absolutely anything that they want to. So for a student who was involved in something like this and did choose to, do some research and attempt to get published, or honestly, it's not even about the publishing, even their own independent research is phenomenal. A lot of students will submit that and we're able to see that. And it's kind of exciting to see the correlation along with their intended major. At the same time, to Aaron and Drew's point, not doing these things is not going to be the end all be all in college admissions. The vast majority of students do not have these opportunities whatsoever to be able to do that. So for me, I would rather the experience than the paper. I would rather you go to a STEM camp, than necessarily a paper. Again, if you find a topic you're interested in, doing independent research on this just for yourself, I think is personally fascinating. I also just want to jump in because it's in the same realm of the conversation. I'm seeing a lot in the chat. Does volunteering and athletics, play a big part in the application process or activities lists, or would painting and things like that count? We were all speaking about this earlier, but to me, there is no one activity that's better than another. It's all on that same list. So if you're really into volunteer work, fantastic. If you're a phenomenal athlete, again, fantastic. It's more about being yourself and being genuine than it is about the specific activity that you are doing. And for the STEM folks in the room, and for those future scientists and engineers, guess what? It is fantastic when we learn that you also like to paint or write poetry or compete in a sport, because we love when students come to us with diverse interests.
Thank you. This is a very interesting question. I see that how to ensure we highlight the kids' current normal ECs. So again, the ECs part, still help them gain admission to top universities without them burning out. So it's yeah, I don't know. Means I'm just reading it out because I know a lot of parents again might be thinking this like, and might be the problem that people are thinking only 10 universities or 20. So all the burnout and everything happens. But I think this is a very general concept, right? How do we not have kids burn out, get into best universities, still somehow strategically play the game? So is there some mantra to that?
I mean, I think one of the things to keep in mind is that 99% of the value of the 4 years of high school have nothing to do with getting into college. Um, there was a student who approached me. I did an essay workshop at a school in Massachusetts about a week or two ago, and he was sitting front row during my essay workshop and taking notes. And when my workshop was done, I opened the floor to questions, and there was about 8 questions amongst the group of like 75 to 100 students. He asked 5 of them. And clearly this was a intense student who was really focused. And then afterwards, when the session was done, he approached for a couple more questions. And he really was really worried about that he was going to be able to accomplish enough. As we were finishing, I said, well, where do you go to school? He says, well, I'll be in 9th grade at blank next year. And yeah, so I had to sort of stop and say, listen, like you're putting the cart before the horse a little bit here. You're fast forwarding through your high school experience because you think it's just about getting to college. And then when you get to college, is it just about getting to that grad program or that first job? And once you get to that, what's it going to be next? We all want for ourselves, and maybe even more so sometimes for our kids, to be the best versions. But at the same time, we have to recognize that there is an inherent value in the present. And truthfully, if you said to me, like, why should what's the real advantage of extracurricular activities in high school? I would say, well, it's the social part. It's being in different friend groups, and it's hearing different adult voices and leadership, and it's identifying interests. It has nothing to do with getting into college. So I think one of the mistakes that we can make as parents sometimes, I'll put myself in the group, is really encouraging our students down certain paths simply because it's a means to an end, as opposed to sort of really supporting them on their interests and their paths that they are interested in. I think there's a mention there in the chat, and I was reflecting upon this earlier, that one of the great things about the pandemic was that official extracurricular activities were shut down. They weren't allowed. And so students were sort of left to hobbies. And that first year or two of the pandemic in the admissions world, it was so great because we read essays about hobbies. And I like about kids learning to sew and reading. I read essays just about kids like reading books and cooking dinner with their parents. I saw a student at Holy Cross the other day, and she's a senior, and I had not seen her in 4 years since I interviewed her the summer before her senior year of high school. And I didn't remember her GPA or her grades, but I remembered the conversation we had. She's from Texas, and she talked about bedazzling her denim overalls. And then she ended up writing her essay about that. Now, she had awesome grades and awesome classes. The denim overalls didn't get her into college, but my point is, I think we have to be supportive of our kids and our students and our applicants of trying to be the best versions of themselves, but at the same time supporting things that interest them and encouraging them to do activities simply because you think it might help them get into college, when oftentimes that might not even be the case. I think that can be sometimes a fool's errand.
I have a couple things on that, and I feel like maybe it's getting a little too deep, but you don't know what school will create what outcome. And I think the best advice is that a school that's a good fit for your child is going to create the best outcome. And that might not be the school that has the best name. But this was reminding me of two things. First off, like that was definitely my town that I grew up in. The way that I got caught up was like, you work really hard in high school, you get into the best college you can get to, and then you get the best job you can get. And I remember getting to college and being like, oh my God, like exhausted, and was like, now it's harder. Now I got into a good school and I have 4 years of a lot of work and I was burnt out. And then I graduated in 2008, which was a rough year to graduate college. And that had nothing to do with me or my hard work. And so you don't know what's coming. And so to Drew's point, like just being on the ride and doing your best and making the most of your opportunities is probably the way to go. And the second thing was there's this movie, and I can't remember what it's called, but this scene always pops up on my social media feed. And it's this girl who spent her whole life trying to get into Yale. And she's like in the bathroom, and one of the other girls who must have been into maybe partying or whatever is like, I'm going to Yale and I'm going to pretend I don't know you. That's basically the scene. And she's like, you did not get into Yale. And then she's like, I did, and said to like so-and-so, where'd you get into? And he like kind of looks burnt, like a burnout. And he's like, oh, I got a soccer scholarship to Stanford. And the other guy is like working for Google, making 6 figures. And she's like, but you guys don't care about school. And the line was, no, we just don't only care about school. And I just thought that was like, that just kind of popped into my mind as we're talking about this, is like, it's okay to like lean into other interests as well. It doesn't mean you'll do poorly or yeah.
Yeah,
Lots of paths.
I'll just echo really quickly everything that's already been said, but I would just say, especially to maybe the parents or guardians in the room, maybe reshaping the conversation a little bit, just kind of with the way that you approach some of the language and talk to your students about this. When you say, how do you go about getting into the best schools? You're thinking about the schools. You're not thinking about the student when it starts to go there. I would also say too that sometimes, and I'm leaning directly into the STEM piece, maybe your child attending something or a school that's not an Ivy or a huge R1 can actually be a benefit to them. A lot of those schools tend to be, large, and the undergraduate attention isn't necessarily as strong as it would be at perhaps a smaller school that still also has fantastic research and things like that. So just more things to keep in mind.
Okay. Um, Now we are kind of close to end, but I have a couple more questions which are more direct, like logistics sort of. So it's like, what's the best way to find the good college for a major? Is it just Google, or like say, assume I want to find which is best college for Pol Science, like, or like best 100 colleges, or so. Like, just
There's a lot of different ways to go about that. I think leaning on guidance and school counselors is a
hmm.
huge one because they've been working in this industry for probably quite some time, have relationships with us on the admission side. A good old fashioned Google search never hurts, you know. Also, this is a space where I do think AI can come into play. You know, you can talk to Claude and Chat GPT and all of these different things and type in your interests and let them know what you're looking for. And some of it is actually quite impressive for the exploratory piece. So I think those are a good thing. If you're a person who's heavily into rankings, you know, there's the Princeton Review, US News and World Report, like all the different things that will, you know, show up with different rankings, poets and quants, all of the above. But I would tend to lean more heavily on probably the school counselor piece if possible.
Um, yeah. Drew, are you about to say
I'm
something?
just going to add one little small thing is that your high school likely has a software that they work with internally, Score or Naviance or one of the smaller few others. Those usually have great search terms by academic areas of interest and geographic area, and they might help narrow your search by what your academic profile is like. So those can be good resources. And that's generally what your school counselor would be using as well.
Okay. So there someone has asked, like, what catches your immediate attention in an application given the fact that you get few minutes to go through it? And I know you guys have talked a lot about this holistic review, but in general, just I want to get an idea, like maximum time, like, okay, not the exceptions, but in general, what's the time average you would spend on an application? Or means
I was
I'm sure.
just talking to someone about this. So, yeah, it's going to differ by school, but I would say like 10 minutes
Mm.
for us.
And I'll say I told this story the other day when I first started in admissions, everything was on paper, and the expectation was that it took you about 25 to 30 minutes to read an application. Now it takes us, like Erin said, 8, 9, 10 minutes. I know the students so much better in those 8 to 10 minutes than I did in the 25 to 30 minutes when I started, because so much of the manual busy work has been taken care of by the computers and the automation that exists. So I used to have to write out the town of the high school that the student was in, and then I used to have to handwrite. Now it's all written, and I can spend those 8 to 10 minutes actually learning about the student. In that 25 to 30 minutes, I probably only spent 4 or 5 minutes because so much of it was manual. It's so much easier now. And we're also, everybody might have flinched when Erin said 10, but this is our job that we do thousands of times every year. It's a repeated, so you just get really good at it. And sometimes your doctor comes in the room and can figure out what's wrong with you in like 4 or 5 minutes. It's because they do that all day long. So
Yeah, no, I mean, to in defense of you guys, I heard a webinar from a professor who is in admission process, and he said, "Well, you all professionals spend 30 seconds. We are spending 10 minutes. So none of the professional can raise questions to ask because I don't think you guys read every resume which you receive. So, but I just wanted all the audience to know, because sometimes people think like it's like a long time on every application which is being spent, but
Yeah. And it's a really good point because one of the having that in mind when you're writing your application is really is helpful because you want to be clear and kind of to the point and understanding that like someone's trying to learn about me in all of the ways they can in a clear fashion. Like you don't want to leave people guessing or not fully understanding what you're trying to say because they are. And like Drew said, we do get pretty good at it. Like, we have new readers each year and they spend a lot more time because they haven't gotten that muscle worked yet. And but we know where the things are that we need to learn and like the things that we can move over. Like, you know, I can't even think of a good one, but like some of the demographic information that maybe either we don't need to know or we can look at it in 2 seconds and be like, figure out if it's something we need to pay attention to or not. Yeah.
Um, okay. Okay, so since we have only couple of minutes left, means I'll ask if any one in the audience have any questions you want to ask. I think Ramesh, do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, yeah. Well, so sorry, I joined late, so maybe you'll discuss if you discuss this already, so we can skip it. Where do you see SAT scores filling the in your layers of cake, so to speak?
I'll quickly summarize, and I'm also, as a Midwesterner, I'm going to acknowledge the ACT, which is an awesome test that the rest of the country outside of New England thinks is an awesome test. We New Englanders tend to not see it as much, but um, uh, there's well over 80% of schools these days that are test optional. There are some highly selective schools that require testing where testing is going to be a big part of their academic review. Usually those schools are not shy about telling you that. And usually the schools that are test optional, where testing may not be a big part of their review process, they're not shy about telling you that either. So I think that's a pretty good school by school question. Usually that information is pretty readily available on the website with their policy and approach. And if you really want to dig in, I would ask a school individually, but just know that most schools do not require standardized testing these days. Some that do take it very seriously.
Okay. So if there are no other questions, I'll ask you guys to like have some parting thoughts for the family so they like we as parents make our kids' life also easy and our lives also easy. I always think mental health of student is something we always look at, but I think mental health of parent, high school parent is also something we should look at.
I will say one thing that I think all three of us up here on this Zoom have said before in numerous different college presentations and panels and keynotes and what have you. But I'm going to phrase it differently, and I'm going to put this out there as a challenge to you all. So both parents and students, because this is going to be a time where emotions could be heightened on both sides. One of the things that helps is to make not all of this, not all of senior year, all of the high school experience about college and about the college conversations. Leave that to a certain time and place. Choose one night a week. So, Taco Tuesdays, we're going to talk about the college process at dinner. That's when the student has the opportunity to get their thoughts out and the parents the opportunity to get their thoughts out. If it's a constant conversation that's looming over everything, it can be too much for the student, too much for the parent. So that's what I would say going throughout the process is pick a day and time to talk about this. And other than that, let your student be a student.
I'm gonna say that, um, try to make it fun. I think sometimes we like it's almost self-fulfilling prophecy. Like we know it's gonna be stressful, so then it's really stressful. And like maybe visit some schools in a place you've never gone before and have it be, research a good place to eat or something nearby so that you're kind of spending time with your family as you're doing this. Maybe drive a little further than even you necessarily want to go, but you're just exploring because sometimes when you're visiting a college, it's not just about do I like this school? It's like, what do I like about this school and what do I not like? So then I know what I'm looking for. So maybe like try and visit a new place and explore with your family.
I will just remind parents. That's okay. Go ahead. Families on the deck trying to be quiet. Um, Applying to college is a very, very public judgment process. When I walk down the stairs in the morning, I don't like the 4-second thing where I walk into the kitchen and my wife looks at me and looks at my outfit and like has feedback for me. I don't like that 4 seconds. And I'm a grown man and we're married. Remember that applying to college is a judgment process. They're being judged when they submit their application. There's a big family of motorcycles riding by my house right now. Anyway, so just understand that your child in particular is going through this, and that adds a little layer of stress and anxiety. But at the same time, I want you to think about their friends, your child's friends. And it is so easy for those of us who have like maybe a rising senior in high school, when we see our son or daughter's friends, to immediately be like, well, where are you applying this year? It would be like them asking you, well, what jobs are you applying for this year? They know they are going to be judged by those schools. It's a great common point to talk to our children's friends about college, but let's talk to them about what excites them about college, or what makes them nervous about college, or what extracurricular activity they're excited to try in college. Let's keep the names of schools out of it. Like, we don't need to be asking our kids' friends every school they're applying to, and if they're applying early or regular. Like, let's just keep the focus on them. Let's give them a little grace through the stressful judgment period of time, and focus on them personally, not so much the process.
Hey, this was all great advice, and I hope a lot of parents and students here. There are a lot of students, which is great. Like I see a lot of students attending, so hopefully they also can take deep breaths. But thank you so much for your time, Drew, Caitlin, and Erin. This was really helpful, and I hope all the audience also found it helpful. And obviously, if I will have any more questions, I can send it to you guys if there are any questions which we forgot to discuss. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. It was very informative. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Aditi,
Yeah.
I saw your question, your message now, but it's okay, I guess.
I think they already took so many questions. So yeah.
Yeah, they covered like all the questions, right? So, and we probably this girl, like they can ask their school counselor. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But they pretty much covered majority of the things, like which were really important. So they covered almost everything.
Oops, let's stop recording.